Warning, this chapter contains adult content which has been recorded in a separate video for members only. To read the chapter in its entirety, please visit the original story from the link in the descriptions. Indomitable Heart by Renette. Chapter 12. Anakin? Obi-Wan asked quietly into his calm once he'd swept the guest room he'd been given. If the Kaminoans had listening devices, they weren't a type he had encountered before, or a type his scanners could pick up. Given the paranoia of the Mando'a, his scanners could pick up a fair bit. His comm was encrypted, and he would just have to hope for the best. Ori'vod, Anakin declared, relief bleeding through in both his tone and their training bond. I'm fine, Obi-Wan reassured. Have you seen any place to land that looks unmonitored? Anakin hummed, and in the background, Obi-Wan could hear the binary chirping of his Padawan's astromech. Likely, it was offering its opinion. Anakin tended to soup up the droids he used regularly, and they tended to overperform for him as a result. R3 says there's an unmonitored hatch not too far from your locator beacon. I'm assuming you're still in your armor. I am. If you can find a way to land unseen and get inside unnoticed, I'd like you to take a crack at their servers and so forth. See what they aren't telling me. Also, the clones. Well, like I said, Jango is here and not exactly by choice. They used him as the genetic source of the clones. He has custody of one he's raised as a son, an incentive for good behavior. They had a chip in Jango's neck, although I'm pretty sure I've neutralized it. I know there's a lot I'm not being told, that Yarn likely wasn't told, and I want as much information as we can get. Osik, Anakin swore. I'll do my best. I know you will. I'll stall them and learn as much as I can through official channels, but I can tell you already that this whole situation stinks like an overfed hut. Ew, no need for that sort of language, Anakin quipped. R3's been running electronic countermeasures since we arrived, so I don't think we've been noticed. I'll make my descent soon. I'll probably lay low for a bit to see what I can learn about their sensors before I do any investigating, but I'll either calm you or find you sometime during local nighttime. Noted, Obi-Wan said, and they signed off. Obi-Wan passed the time by reading further on the official information the Prime Minister Anton Wei had given him, comparing that to the data Yan had sent. There were numerous discrepancies, and the rumors Jango had passed on diverged even further. Culling of defective clones. Obi-Wan shuddered. It would change. It had to. Determination reinvigorating him, Obi-Wan read on, taking notes and forcing himself to let go of his anger. Each time it threatened to overwhelm him and cloud his judgment. A few hours later, he was nodding off over his pad, doggedly trying to press on. A curving panel near the ceiling shifted almost silently, and Obi-Wan didn't look up. He did mentally prepare to defend himself for a moment, before realizing just who was about to infiltrate his quarters. With a smile, he sat down his pad and looked up in time to watch Anakin drop down from the ceiling. For such a tall, gangling young man, his Padawan could move with surprising grace. Obi-Wan silently greeted Anakin with Mando hand talk, and the greeting was returned in kind, along with Anakin's assurance that the space was cleaned by his sweeps, too. Any trouble getting inside? Obi-Wan asked. Anakin shook his head. I clamped on the underside of a dome and came in through one of the cleanest maintenance shafts I've ever seen, Anakin said. Found a server room and accessed their data core there. If you need to send anything off-planet, we can bounce a signal through R3. My transponder is still masked. Anything interesting? Obi-Wan asked quietly. Honestly? Anakin asked, and Obi-Wan nodded. Interesting isn't the right word. They're... Ugh! He expressed with frustrated anger. Demagolkase. He finally grit out, imbuing the epithet with the full measure of disgust they deserved. They have detention levels that would make your skin crawl, and the things they do to the substandard and defective clones just... Ori'vod, this place, these people, I've never meant it more when I called someone a monster. Obi-Wan grimaced. With his background and knowing the evil of which sentients were capable, Anakin didn't likely make such accusations. Tell me, Obi-Wan said, girding himself. About 9 years ago, they stopped terminating the occasional female clones and began raising them separately from the boys. Some of the male trainers have custody of female clones. I don't think I need to go into any more detail. They're physically about 16 to 18 when they leave their dormitories to stay with the trainers.
but their education is very rudimentary. Obi-Wan grimaced again, forcing himself to let go of his rage. They stopped calling this force-sensitive clones after a while too, but they're kept in what amount to sensory deprivation cells, and routinely subjected to so-called experiments that any other sentient world would recognize as torture. Clones with defects that are easily fixed through surgery are treated and returned to the general population. Those with more exotic problems are treated like lab animals. Those who are gravely injured are kept sedated and used as organ banks. This whole place is awful. Is there anything about chips? Obi-Wan asked. If they had one in Jango, I wouldn't put it past them to chip the soldiers. I haven't seen anything about it yet, but I accessed their fiber network and attached a reader so it's transmitting everything to R3. I didn't need to stay and monitor it once it was hooked up and I had everything from the secure server that wasn't networked to the rest of the system. But there's a lot of data and I couldn't stomach learning more after a while.
Anakin said with a grimace.
Alright, I'm thinking I'll send a quiet message tonight to tell the council what to expect, then make an official call to the temple tomorrow from their comm center. If they can make it sound like the Daybreaker is coming in an official Jedi capacity, we can get Jango and Boba and maybe some of the clones to the temple. Obi-Wan outlined. I don't like the idea of the Kaminoans being unsupervised, Anakin said, fidgeting nervously with his Padawan braid. I don't either. But I believe they'll keep their word if we present our conditions in terminology they understand. And I have a feeling that if we can get them there will be quite a few hot Mando'a wishing to remain on Kamino to keep an eye on things for Jango. Obi-Wan said. Anakin nodded. He was well aware how loyal the hot Mando'a were to Jango. They'd been looking for him for 10 years, unwilling to accept he might be dead rather than missing. When they learned Jango was essentially a prisoner, they would be incensed and more than willing to do his bidding. Obi-Wan sighed, rubbing at the week's worth of growth on his chin. He looked tired, Anakin thought. Best for them to finish up their planning then, so hopefully Obi-Wan could at least rest his eyes a little. I'm opposed to us becoming generals, Obi-Wan said wearily. But I just might change my mind if it means we have full power over what happens here. We could get all those imprisoned freed, and ensure that the others are treated like the sentient beings they are. Sounds like a plan to me, Anakin said. Want me to go back aloft and come back openly with the Daybreaker? Good idea, Obi-Wan said with a smile, and Anakin beamed briefly, as he always did when praised. All right. They can use my transponder codes, so the Daybreaker will read as a Jedi vessel. Be careful, Ori'vod, Anakin said. Oh yeah, Anakin. Obi-Wan returned sadly, and then Anakin was climbing back up into the vent. Obi-Wan helped him slide the panel back into place, and then sent a heavily encrypted text-only message to the council from his personal comm, boosted to Anakin's souped-up astromech, outlining his plan to them. He stayed up a few hours more, reading and waiting for a response. He'd sent a basic summation of the new information Anakin had shared with his suggestions, hoping the atrocities committed in the Order's name would motivate the council to quick action. To Obi-Wan's relief, he soon received a message from Mace strongly agreeing with his plans and authorizing him to use whatever means necessary to prohibit any further culling, along with other stopgap measures until they could either take full custody of every clone already formed, from the newest Blastocyst to the oldest test batches, or at least install a permanent Jedi presence on Kamino. Between worry over Jango, worry over Anakin, and the massive information he was trying to cram into his head, Obi-Wan didn't sleep that night. He meditated for about an hour, trying to settle the new knowledge into his memory and preparing himself for the coming day. He knew that his emotional control would continue to be tested, and he doubted he'd truly rest until he was headed back to Coruscant, hopefully with Jango at his side. In the morning, Obi-Wan requested a more thorough tour of the facilities, asking questions and letting himself be seen by the training cadets and their trainers. Some of the trainers would know him by his Beskar. The others, well, they would likely pick out the Jedi and hot Mando'a sigils on his pauldrons. He'd never been shy about his associations. When he felt he'd made enough of a show of his interest and attention, and had officially heard the terms cull and terminated, he requested use of their comm center to contact the Coruscant Jedi Temple. The Kaminoans agreed easily, and then hovered nearby as he entered his codes. Night Kenobi, Master Windu greeted when the temple's comm center relayed him through to the council. Master Windu,
Obi-Wan returned and launched into his report on the strength of the army and efficacy of their training, then segued without pause into some of his concerns. He didn't mention the detention levels, the so-called experiments, the prostitution of the female clones. He didn't officially know about those particular atrocities, but he made clear that he thought the Kaminoans were wasting money by terminating clones that could still fight, or at least fill support positions in the new army. The terminology was cruel, and it turned his stomach, but clearly the Kaminoans cared nothing for the morality of cloning sentient beings. A disgruntled client, on the other hand, might take their business elsewhere if they felt the Kaminoans were being wasteful. Obi-Wan hoped that by speaking of credits and profit, the Kaminoans would care about their bottom line enough to start meeting the basic standards for the care of sentient beings. He would do everything in his power to assure that Jango's children were somewhat safer in his absence. Jedi Skywalker is en route with the Daybreaker, Master Windu said when Obi-Wan finished. We anticipated your report and would like to review a contingent of the army here. Bring the genetic source as well.
The bounty hunter Jango Fett has a young son. I doubt the boy can be left behind,
Obi-Wan warned, purposefully misconstruing the exact relationship between the two. Mace already knew the truth, and it allowed the Kaminoans to view the Jedi as overly sentimental. Anything that contributed to the Jedi being underestimated, Obi-Wan was willing to use to his advantage at this point. Fett is welcome to bring his son, Mace said. I'll look forward to seeing some of these troops in person. They talked a little bit longer, things they'd already planned out to ensure Obi-Wan could give the necessary orders to the Kaminoans currently responsible for the army. At the moment, ensuring the health and safety of the clones took precedence over arguments about who really had jurisdiction over their welfare, the Jedi as the supposed originators of the Order, or the Republic as the funders and planned recipients of the army. When Obi-Wan had lodged all the appropriate complaints, and Mace had given him the orders and authority to enact the most pressing charges, Obi-Wan signed off and turned to Tonway. The Kaminoan looked the closest to nervous Obi-Wan imagined they could look.
My orders are clear,
Obi-Wan said firmly, and eventually he was shown back to the Prime Minister's office, where he made his demands that the clones be given the basic list of rights any sentient was due. Obi-Wan was very specific and very firm. No clone was to be experimented on, culled, euthanized, or terminated. No clone was to be forced into sexual situations, used for spare parts, locked in isolation, or otherwise terrorized. The list went on. Within a few hours, the female clones who had been given over to members of the training corps were moved back into the dormitories with their younger sisters, and new dormitories had been opened up for the Force-sensitive clones. Obi-Wan took care of moving them personally, opening his shields wide and exuding his calmness, blanketing them in serenity. Those who had been vivisected, their limbs and organs harvested, were moved to palliative care. And that night, for the first time in their memories, every single clone in Tipoca City able to leave their bunk was gathered together in the same space, so Obi-Wan could address them all at once. The rest of the clones in palliative care and in the other training centers dotted around the planet watched via holo. The members of the training corps lined the walls when the troopers were marched in, and Jango and Bubba were next to the dais where Obi-Wan stood. Their relationship would remain a secret for the moment. Obi-Wan didn't want to give the Kaminoans any chance to question his right to give orders. Better he get Jango and Bubba away from Kamino first. Stepping up, Obi-Wan cleared his throat, then squared his shoulders and addressed the troops, his voice reverberating strong and clear through the massive parade ground. Obi-Wan told them the truth, from a certain point of view.
I am Obi-Wan Kenobi, Jedi Knight, he introduced himself. A few weeks ago, Jedi Master Yon Dooku came to Kamino following a lead on a missing Jedi, Master Cypher Dyas. Master Cypher Dyas negotiated the creation of this army on behalf of the Republic. Due to the time frame in which Master Cypher Dyas went missing, your training has not been properly reported to the Jedi Council. Within a week, a cruiser will arrive with more trainers to evaluate your skills. These new trainers will stay here in Tipoca City and visit the other training complexes while assessments are conducted. The High Council would like to meet Jango Fett in person and review the most senior group of troopers, those known as the Alpha Arc class. They, along with Boba Fett and Tonway, will accompany us to the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. If Cal Skirata is willing to accompany us, he and the Null class under his command are also invited to accompany us to Coruscant. Until further notice, all clones, even the defective, no matter the defect, are entitled to the same education and training."
At that pronouncement, a cheer was stifled among the soldiers, and the cloud of tension that had hovered over them dissipated. Obi-Wan smiled slightly before he continued, his own tension easing.
"While the incoming trainers are not force-sensitive, I am assured that more Jedi will soon be assigned, and until we depart, I will undertake the assessment and training of force-sensitive cadets myself," Obi-Wan continued. "Over the course of the coming days, I will also be meeting with your trainers and the Kaminoans, and reading the information they have recorded over the past years on your training and skills. I will answer your questions to the best of my ability, although I will ask your patience as I am still learning the full scope of this project and may not have the information you seek."
As Obi-Wan stepped down, he nodded to Jango and wished more than anything that he could go to his husband in their Adiik. Instead, he looked into the eyes of every trainer who had taken one of Jango's daughters and promised himself vengeance. It might not be the Jedi way, but in this, he was all Mando'a. Obi-Wan made himself very visible until the Daybreaker arrived. For part of that time, he commandeered one of the gymnasiums to train the Force-sensitive clones in the basics of Force use and ethics. He taught them basic meditation techniques and also taught them the proud history of Mando Force-sensitives, showing them his lightsabers and some basic training exercises. He spent time with Jango and Baba when he could, and thankfully the Daybreaker arrived before too long. Miles and Silas accompanied Anakin off the ship, Anakin in standard Jedi robes without a hint of his usual armor, and Miles and Silas in civilian garb. Obi-Wan blinked at them. He rarely saw Miles or Silas out of armor and barely knew how to react to them in Spacer's manners. Obi-Wan greeted Miles and Silas cordially and Anakin more affectionately. Jango restrained himself from rushing to his friends, his brothers, and everything but blood. Thankfully, they didn't have to maintain the charade for long. The entry ramp was barely closed before the Alpha Arcs were being taken to the infirmary. While the Hot Mando'a might not have a dedicated doctor, they had plenty of battlefield medics and top-of-the-line medical droids who could look the troopers over and make sure the Kaminoans had given them adequate care. As soon as they cleared Kamino's gravity well, the Daybreaker punched into hyperspace, and Obi-Wan turned to Tonwei, who would accompany Jango, Obi-Wan, Anakin, Miles, and Silas to the bridge. The Kaminoan blinked, large dark eyes, surveying the ring of dense Mando'a ringing them.
"When you reach Coruscant, you will cooperate with the Jedi Council, telling us everything we need to know about this army, its formation, and the training to which the soldiers have been subjected," Obi-Wan said firmly.
"Is that not my purpose in accompanying you?" Tonwei asked. Obi-Wan grit his teeth. Clearly, human body language wasn't something the Kaminoan understood. "My expertise on the product," Tonwei began.
"Clones. They're people," Jango cut in. "They're my children."
Tonwei blinked again.
"Why don't we find you some quarters?" Obi-Wan said to Tonwei.
"We prepared guest quarters near medical for them," Silas advised, and Obi-Wan nodded, leading Tonwei away.
"I would advise you begin thinking of the clones as the sentient beings they are rather than product. Every being on the ship is loyal without question to Jango Fett," Obi-Wan said as they walked down the corridor. "And Jango isn't exactly pleased to have been held hostage for the past decade."
Tonwei dipped their head and they walked in silence to the area Silas had mentioned. The Kaminoan Obi-Wan thought was lucky Jango hadn't just decided to duck them on sheer principle. As sole representative to their race on the Daybreaker, Tonwei would likely be facing more than a little hostility.
"If you want to be helpful, start typing up everything you know about the army," Obi-Wan suggested, pointing at the datapad on the Spartan room's bed. "The ship's intercom will announce mealtimes."
Tonwei looked around, but didn't argue. Obi-Wan withdrew, letting the door slide closed behind him. He debated a moment, then texted Jango.
"Where are you?" "Mudbite."
Jango texted back, and Obi-Wan went to meet him there. Jango was sitting on a bed, a backed-up bandage on his neck, showing he'd already had his chip cut out. Baba sat at Jango's side, a med-droid scanning him and asking questions. Obi-Wan crossed to Jango, who looked up and smiled as Obi-Wan approached.
"Riduur,"
Obi-Wan greeted, nudging his helmet against Jango's head.
Obi-Wan.
Jango returned, pressing their heads together. The troopers were already being scanned to ensure the Kaminoans had kept them in perfect health and not put chips in them. Baba was thankfully free, but every one of the other clones scanned so far had chips. And unlike Jango's, the clones weren't in an easily accessible area. Theirs were inside their skulls. Jedi healers Obi-Wan promised would remove them when they reached Coruscant. They would be free. Once everyone had cleared medical, Obi-Wan made proper introductions and gave a painfully honest briefing to the ARC troops. The Jedi Council had neither authorized the purchase or formation of the army. Jango had been held against his will, Baba a hostage for Jango's continued good behavior for the duration. Obi-Wan was Jango's husband as well as a Jedi, and likely there were already more Jedi on the way to Kamino to look after things there. The troopers took the news surprisingly well. Obi-Wan imagined they took after their progenitor to a degree, and Jango was all but unflappable. Once everything was settled, though, the hot Mando'a proceeded to break out the Tihaar and Gal and welcome Jango home and welcome the troopers to the clan. They need names, Silas declared when he was a few drinks in, with the others agreeing loudly. Obi-Wan smiled, shook his head, and went to nestle against Jango's side. At 19, Anakin was loath to admit he somewhat envied his mentor's romantic relationship, deep and steady, sustaining even through the long years of separation. Many other Padawans his age were happily jumping bed to bed, learning what types of pleasure they enjoyed, or whether they wanted a sexual relationship at all. Anakin waffled on that matter. If it was the right person, he thought, someone who inspired him to be the best Jedi, the best Mando'a, the best person he could be, and someone who, like Jango, could understand that Anakin would often have to put duty first. And if they were willing to adopt Mando cultural traditions, even better.
Sleep well, Ori'vod,
Anakin asked cheekily. Obi-Wan just narrowed his eyes, and Anakin grinned.
Anakin, Jango, Anakin.
Obi-Wan introduced instead of indulging his beloved breath of a Padawan. Anakin rose from the table and offered his hand. Jango gripped Anakin's forearm in the Mando fashion, smiling slightly up at the tall young man. You could easily see the mix of Jedi and Mando influences in Obi-Wan's Padawan. Anakin's hair was cropped short, and he didn't bother with a nerf tail. The sides and back of his head shaved close to the skin, save the long learner's braid behind his ear. He wore leather tabards in the Jedi style over an armor-weave flight suit and Mando-style gauntlets and boots.
Anakin,
Jango greeted with a slight smile.
You're still about 10 in my memory, but I'll catch up,
he warned, and Anakin blinked.
You told him about me,
Anakin asked Obi-Wan in surprise. He hadn't even been Obi-Wan's Padawan when Jango went missing.
Of course I did,
Obi-Wan said.
Even before I decided to take you as my Padawan, you were very dear to me, Anika.
Anakin flushed with delight at that and leaned down to hug his Ori'vod. Flatterer, Anakin grumped, trying to hide how touched he was.
Only the truth,
Obi-Wan argued, patting Anakin's encircling arms.
Now sit and eat. You're still growing.
Anakin huffed, but sat and continued to put away his prodigious meal. Baba soon joined them, pressing against Jango's side and stealing food off his Buir's plate. It was clear Baba was unused to not being the center of Jango's attention. Obi-Wan mentally promised he'd do his best to be helpful, to not monopolize Jango. It would be difficult enough with the rest of the clan clamoring for their Mandalorian's attention. He didn't want to make things any more difficult for Baba. Besides, it wasn't as though there wasn't more than enough to do. Obi-Wan didn't move out of Jango's bunk, nothing that drastic, and Baba seemed okay with that. He had his own berths and was used to sleeping in a separate room from his Buir. So nights, Obi-Wan and Jango had to themselves, and they took full advantage of that, making up for lost time.
I know it was said in the middle of sex, but I'm serious,
Jango warned after a bit more cuddling. He reached up, ruffling his fingers through Obi-Wan's short beard.
I'll do whatever I can to stay with you, through whatever we come up against. If that means I only take Republic contracts, well, honestly, I'm not sure how that will work, but I want to try. I want to be at your side. Mi solus tome,
Obi-Wan husked, and Jango nodded firmly.
Mi solus tome.
Jango echoed, nuzzling their noses together, then sliding their mouths into a breathy kiss.
No riduur. Go riduur, Obi-Wan affirmed happily, and they dozed off, wound around one another, not letting go, even in sleep. They had a later than usual first meal come morning, and a bit more teasing from the Mando'a and Anakin alike. Both Obi-Wan and Jango took the teasing in good spirits. They were at that state of happiness where ribbing just rolled off them. The Alpha Arcs watched everything carefully for the week of transit to Coruscant. They'd never been around so many natural-borns before, and frequently looked to Jango for direction. Obi-Wan did his best to make himself available to them as well, although he was wary of saying anything that sounded too much like an order. They clearly held Jedi in high regard, and while Jango assured him these clones were more independent-minded than most, Obi-Wan didn't want to exert undue influence on them if it wasn't necessary. Obi-Wan could vaguely understand the Kaminoans' reasoning for making the cloned soldiers loyal and devoted, but he worried deeply about the actual practice. What if they were given an illogical or strategically unsound order by a Jedi? Would they knowingly follow an impractical battle plan, even unto death? The prospect turned his stomach. He would find a way to make things better, Obi-Wan promised himself. They deserved that, and so much more.